Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of the Cyber AB, Cytorus Technologies, Redspin, and Caresoft, I would like to welcome you all to today's webcast, CMMC, A New Year with New Resolutions. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few quick housekeeping items. If you could please all direct your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. We did also get a bunch of questions submitted at the point of registration. So appreciate everyone who submitted their questions ahead of time. We'll be sure to follow up with you offline after the fact if we do not have time to get through everything today. We will be recording this webcast, and a link will be sent out in a follow-up email for you to view it again or share with a colleague. We are also pleased to be offering one CPE credit, or continuing professional education credit, to those that attend today's webinar. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be present, registering your attendance by signing in with your full name and actively participating in the polling questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. If you would like more information on the CPE credits we are offering, feel free to click on that link at the bottom of the screen right now. And if you meet all of today's requirements, you can expect to receive your certificate of completion within 2 weeks. Now, I would like to tell you just a little bit about Caresoft. Caresoft is the trusted government IT solutions provider and a top GSA schedule holder, supporting an ecosystem of manufacturers, resellers, integrators, and consulting partners committed to serving the public sector. We have committed cybersecurity and defense teams and specialize in providing coverage to federal, state, local, education, and defense industrial-based customers with a variety of cybersecurity solutions. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so please do not hesitate to reach out for any needs you may have. And at this time, I would like to hand it over to our moderator for today's session, Dave Glenn, the Chief Business Development Officer for Cytorus Technologies. So Dave, I will hand it to you, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Brandon. Appreciate it. And thanks to Caresoft for hosting today. I'd like to briefly introduce our panel this morning. We are excited to have Matt Travis, who's the CEO for the Cyber AB, with us. The Cyber AB is the official accreditation body for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, that we're talking about today. Welcome, Matt. Robert Hill is the CEO and founder of Cytorus Technologies. Cytorus is a continuous compliance and risk management platform that really provides solutions across multiple frameworks and compliance mandates, and as well as is the organization that created the CMMC readiness tool, which the Cyber AB provides for RPOs. Thomas Graham and Robert Teager from Redspin. Redspin is the first authorized C3PAO. They've conducted a lot of multiple joint surveillance assessments and overall help organizations navigate CMMC. Thomas Graham is the VP and Information Security Officer, and Robert Teague is the Senior Manager for CMMC Services. So again, we're really excited about having this conversation today. Gentlemen, I wanted to kind of open it up with asking Matt quickly. Matt, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what CMMC is, just for those that maybe aren't as familiar, and really interested in understanding key takeaways and maybe what the Cyber AB does in that process too. If you want to wrap that together, that'd be great.
Sure, Dave. Good to be with you, and thanks to Caresoft and Brandon for the invitation. Certainly just as a starting point, right? So CMMC is the cybersecurity conformity regime that the Department of Defense is implementing to ensure that any companies, or most companies with whom they do business, have their cybersecurity practices validated either by the company themselves or more broadly by a third party. And so when you think about supply chain risk management for DoD, we know for sure that over the past several years, our cyber threat actor adversaries, whether it be from China or elsewhere, have been exfiltrating, unclassified information, but it's controlled unclassified information. This is actually very important type of data that resides on many contractor networks within the defense industrial base. And while protecting that data has been a requirement in most, if not most, DoD contracts for years, and the self-assessment scoring has been a requirement, we recognize that has not been effective in actually compelling companies within the DIB to implement these practices that all come from the NIST 800 and 171 standard. So CMMC is the requirements. Again, those requirements to implement the standard have been in existence for quite some time for most of the DIB. The CMMC is a requirement to have that implementation certified by a third party. Those third parties are called C3PAOs, and we at the Cyber AB, first and foremost, are the accreditation body to ensure that those C3PAOs are using qualified and certified individuals, that they're following consistent practices, utilizing all the official doctrine and documents to conduct those assessments, and probably most importantly, are free from any conflicts of interest with the companies whom they are assessing. And so in addition, we kind of play this role as building capacity, building the CMMC ecosystem of C3POs and assessors and instructors and curriculum publishers, as well as all the practitioners that exist out there to help defense contractors implement the standard and get ready for the CMMC assessments. We oversee the ethics and conflict of interest policing, and we run the CMMC marketplace, where you can see all of the companies, individuals who have come into the ecosystem to support DoD on this very ambitious and important initiative. And so, in a nutshell, the department can no longer just rely on companies to treat cybersecurity as just another term and condition on their contracts. If you want to do business with DoD, once CMMC goes into full force, you will most likely need to have that implementation of what is really basic cyber hygiene, certainly level 2 and level 1, certified by a third party. That's what CMMC is, and the proposed rule for all of this came out right before Christmas, which I know will be a big topic of today's discussion, Dave. So hope that kicks it off, and happy to engage with you in the panel moving forward here.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Matt. And just as a reminder for those audience attendees, there is a Q&A box down at the bottom and a chat feature there. If you have questions, please go ahead and interject those in there. Easy for me to say, and we will respond to those as soon as we can. We do want this to be an interactive discussion. So Matt just mentioned that the rules dropped. I'm not sure I really understand the public comment period. I wanted to find out from, maybe starting with Thomas and then Robert and Robert Teague. What is the public comment period? Is there any chance the rule will change as a result? What do we expect to see with that?
Well, regarding the public comment period, David, essentially in a nutshell, what it is that anytime a proposed rule is dropped by the agency, it has to go into a 60-day comment period, and that provides not only industry, but also, honestly, anybody else to either comment, ask questions, or interject anything to the DoD. Now, at the conclusion of that 60-day comment period, what occurs is the DoD actually has to adjudicate or answer all of those questions and comments. And this is prior to the rule becoming final. So if you're sitting out there, you've read through the proposed rule, you have questions on it, something just may not seem kosher to you, ask the question. This is your chance to ask it directly to the people that wrote the rule to get the answer versus, somebody just speculating on what the language actually means.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Matt has held quite a few town halls and has talked about the public comment period and made the statement, be mindful when you're making comments back to the DoD. Make sure they're constructive. The more comments that the DoD gets, the longer it's going to take for them to adjudicate all of those comments. So when you're submitting comments, whether you're seeking clarification on something that's written in the rule, or whether you want to see something changed, whatever the case may be, identify what it is, and then give them your comment. And then if you have a solution, offer that solution to them as well. Don't just come to them with a problem, right?
And Teague, I think that is important. If we look at the questions right now, Jay Beer asked a question about the ESPs. That is a perfect example of a question. He asked a legitimate question and then proposes a potential solution. And Jay, speaking to that question, it's not something we can answer on this call. Matt may have some ideas on that, but that is an excellent question during this comment period.
I think, Robert, I think you're absolutely right. What I believe, and again, I should see on the upfront, the Cyber AB is an independent, nonprofit, a 501c3 organization that supports DoD through a no-cost contract. So nothing I say should be construed as representing DoD or the U.S. government. That said, the sense that I certainly have gotten over the past year is that the department is looking in this public comment period for constructive feedback from industry, from the CMMC ecosystem, from subject matter experts out there in conformity and compliance. And so this isn't just an administrative check the box procedure that the government has to go through to ensure that the public has had ample time to kind of look at impending rule. I think this is a case where the department is going to be looking at that feedback quite closely. And while everyone's free to submit commentary and criticism or critique, what is going to be most helpful to the DIB, to the CMMC initiative, is for good ideas to be brought forward. This is the rare case, Robert, when a good idea window is actually open.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we can help mature this and answer those legitimate concerns that the defense industrial base has. So this is a very positive thing. So Jay, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I don't know if any of us that can answer that right now because we're having the exact same question you asked.
Well, just also keep in mind, not only for us here on this panel, but also for the folks that are listening in. This program, it isn't just focused on GRC vendors within the DIB. It's not focused just on cybersecurity folks within the DIB. It is focused, as Matt mentioned at the very beginning, on any organization based upon the type of information they have. FCI, federal contract information, that is essentially every organization that has a contract with the Department of Defense has to potentially, probably, and will have to address level 1. If you're looking at level 2, that brings into the CUI information that Matt mentioned. If you store, process, or transmit CUI, regardless if you're a cybersecurity company, you're a manufacturer, whatever the case may be, if you store, process, or transmit that information, that's going to bring level 2 into play. So please be mindful. It's just not one type of company. It's based upon the type of information that you have pursuant to that contract.
And Thomas, I think one of the big things that we should, I know this is a rabbit hole, but while we're talking about this, let's go down it slightly for you and Teague. There's a difference between what is classified as CUI by the government and those items that are classified as organizationally controlled information by the organization. And so we've heard that you can have a combination of data that in itself, when combined, becomes CUI. But I think the question is out there, is CUI designated by government or designated by the organization, and where does that fall? And so I think those are some questions that folks are still struggling with.
Hey, Robert, I want to just be the terminology, please, real quick, just so the audience doesn't get confused. We're not talking about classified information. It's really the CUI and FCI is designated or marked as such.
Right.
Classified information is a separate category, which is not, as you all know, not part of CUI. I just want to clarify that. Yeah.
Designated versus classified. You're right. It's designated as CUI by the federal, not classified. Yeah, terminology. Thank you so much, Matt.
I want to just highlight something an audience member just said. Kelby Price just brought up. There are a number of guides about writing comments during the commentary period that I found very helpful and helps guide the most constructive way to provide commentary. I appreciate that you guys highlighted what Matt said on the town hall about providing relevant commentary. Read the rule first, and then look at that. And as Kelby mentioned, there's some guides about writing comments during the commentary period that may be useful for that as well. So within that proposed rule, there's that phased implementation process that we were talking about that the DoD is going to go through. There's this October 1st, 2026 date that where they say that's the definitive time it will be in all the contracts. Matt, can you walk us through that phased approach and how that might impact the defense industrial base?
Yeah, happy to, David. So for anyone who is kind of following CMMC 1.0, I would encourage you to kind of dispense with all of the implementation plans that were part of CMMC 1.0 going back a few years. There were pilot contracts and a pilot program. That's not the approach the DoD is going to take for CMMC 2.0. There's going to be a phased-in approach that Dave mentioned. So, just to recap kind of how the rulemaking will proceed, public comment period is open now through February 26th. After which DoD will have to bin and then start adjudicating and answering all the questions and comments that come in. And that can take a while given the volume of commentary. So at some point, hopefully in 2024, they will finish adjudicating those comments and relatedly tweak, adjust the rule, add language, edit language, take out whatever that's going to be. Run that back through, I think, OIRA, which is essentially OMB, that's got to review these federal rules. Congress gets a window to review it, and then you'll see it published as the final rule. In that final rule, there'll be effective date of when CMMC is in force. That could be 1st of January 2025. It could be the 1st of March. It could be later. It could be sooner. We don't know yet. But there'll be an effective date of when the rule is live. And then the department in the proposed rule has said the first 6 months, any new contracts, contracting officers can put in requirements that DIB contractors will have to do self-assessments under the CMMC framework, the CMMC assessment guides, how the CMMC rule is laid out, and enter that into SPRS, which so there's not going to be any assessments required in the first 6 months. And then after 6 months, they'll start putting in language requiring level 2 certification. That's when the C3POs come in play, and new contracts or renewed contracts could ostensibly have those requirements. And then ultimately, David, you said by October 1st, 2026, all contracts coming out of DoD, all new contracts and all, I think the way it's been inferred, renewed contracts or even potentially option years that are added will have those requirements. I think it's important to note that a lot of companies are not going to sit around and wait for a contract that they're looking at or a contract on which they're the incumbent gets those requirements. We've already seen through the Joint Surveillance Program, which is a program that allows certain, really any defense company that's got a prime or subcontract to be an early mover and get assessed jointly by a C3PO and the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, which the rule states if they're successful in that assessment will convey to a level 2 certification after rulemaking. So there are companies clearly who don't want to wait for their contract to have those requirements. And once CMMC starts, even during that first 6 months of self-assessment, C3POs will be available and able to go ahead and conduct level 2 certification assessments. I suspect that the demand signal is going to be pretty high for that because, I used to be in a DIB company and I wouldn't certainly want to wait around just until the one contract I have my eye on has a requirement. Once CMMC is ready to go, I'm going to want to get assessed. And so I don't put as much stock into that phase of implementation as maybe others do, because I do think responsible companies within the DIB are going to want to have already implemented the standard or be implementing it now. And then once they're available to get certified, they're going to move forward with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Good clarity there. Robert Hill, we've talked a little bit about those phases over time. In the meantime, are there other ways that we expect that existing contracts will be impacted by the rule?
Dave, it's interesting you asked that because we have been seeing that already for the past year, where primes, regardless of what is coming with the rulemaking, primes knowing this is happening and knowing the breadth of contracts, we're talking about over 300,000 companies, commercial companies that are, providing services to these primes under these prime held contracts. Primes are already going down into their supply chain and saying, you will have this, you will meet this. And the companies are coming back saying, pushing back, saying, wait, it's not until 2025, 2026. And the primes are saying, if you want to do business with us, you will have this now. And so the primes are pushing this already down through the ecosystem. And one of the things that Cyturus is rolling out this next week with Carahsoft is actually rolling this project out. But just like we did with the CyberAB and the RPO product, we're doing the same with Carahsoft for the OSCs, where it is a self-guided assessment. It meets that criteria for that first piece. So companies now can start doing that self-guided assessment, get that SPUR score, get that guidance, get their notes in, and start tracking the mitigation and remediation of these POAMs, of the SSP generation, doing these things. So then that data is already available to the RPOs within the CyberAB CRT instance, where an RPO can be affiliated through the membership portal. And the data they've been working on for weeks, months, etc., is already there for that RPO. And then as Teague and Graham can talk about, a C3PAO can come in to that same data set and then do that assessment what now is a voluntary assessment, then will be the actual assessment. So that data flow starts today. And we're rolling that out this next week to the entire defense industrial base. And Caresoft has more information on that. So that these organizations have a single place to begin to start that process, including that self-guided assessment, then that RPO engagement for the maturity, and then into that C3PAO. So we're already seeing the impact in developing solutions to be ahead of that curve so organizations don't have to wait. T, Graham, anything you want to add to that? Because I know that you're seeing the same thing we are.
Well, the important thing to keep in mind, Robert, with what you're saying is that, I believe Matt touched on this at the beginning. CMMC is the validation or the assessment of requirements that are already in place. And for full disclosure, the requirements or practices, as they've been referred to this point, they've been enforceable since December 31st of 2017. So all organizations that have been working in this arena, whether you realize it or not, these requirements have supposed to have been in place and functioning since then. And that's something that, honestly, a lot of organizations are still struggling with, is to get from where they are to having the requirements in place. That's the biggest struggle. All CMMC we're waiting for is, the rule to come out, and it's the third-party attestation
Of meeting those requirements that have been in place for 6 years.
Yeah.
So I think that go ahead, Robert.
No, and one of the other things is that a lot of folks are still struggling with what is CUI, right? So a lot of our listeners out here right now, a lot of the folks in the DIB are constantly reaching out to Thomas and myself. I'm sure Matt gets a lot of questions. What is CUI? The data I have, is it CUI? And we turn everybody back around and say, contact your POC for that contract, and they should be able to clarify for you. So hopefully that will help everybody listening.
Thank you for that. There are a couple of audience questions that I think tie into a question I meant to ask a little later, but I think it kind of ties into this. How do we anticipate that other organizations? I think the way the question was asked online here was, do we know if this requirement will expand to the other executive agencies? This question's for Matt. And then kind of the question that we had here was, do you have any insights as to who else might adopt CMMC and what that might look like?
Dave, there's not been anything definitive yet, but I think if you take a look at documents like the National Cybersecurity Strategy that the White House released last March, if you look at some of the the foreshadowing that you might see in certain documents in the Department of Energy or NASA or other places, you see where this is all going. Right, the need to secure government supply chains, to manage digital risk in a much more active and verifiable manner than digital risk has been managed is where the government's going. And so CMMC is really a trailblazer. Nothing at this scale has been attempted before. This really is the most ambitious cybersecurity conformity regime ever attempted. When you think about, as I think it was Rob or Thomas talking about the number of companies or in the DIB, this is something I think a lot of other departments are watching, and I certainly expect that once CMMC proves to be the successful program that it is, you're going to see other departments and agencies within the civilian executive branch follow in the wake of CMMC. You look at that strategy that I referenced, it calls for unifying standards, which is exactly what NIST 800-171 is. It talks about using the government's leverage of procurement to compel better cybersecurity hygiene. It talks about public-private partnerships, which is what CMMC is when you think about the private sector providing the C3POs and the assessors and the instructors to support DoD on this. It really, CMMC really hits on a lot of the principles and themes and tenets of that strategy. So my expectation has been for a long time that a few years down the road, you're not going to think twice about the need to get a cybersecurity assessment for government contracting. That throughout the GovCon landscape, not just DoD, federal, and I think even state, local, we're seeing international interest. There are countries that have actually declared, like Canada, they're going to mirror the CMMC program. So DoD's leading the way. I think other agencies within government will follow. And just as no one thinks twice about having to get a tax audit, this is essentially an audit to ensure that you are meeting your responsibilities as stewards of DoD data. So nothing yet, but I think once CMMC launches, you're going to see others follow. Whether that comes from GSA, whether that comes from the FAR Council, which is an acquisition group within the federal government. Not sure what the mechanism will be, but I do expect there will be other very similar, if not identical, programs like CMMC.
And man, I think it's important. You kind of made one statement there that I'd like for you to go back on, and that is about the international community. So far, people look at this as being, oh, this is the DoD. This is the US DoD. This is constrained to the DoD contractors that are US-based companies. But Matt, you slid in there international. So if you don't mind, talk a little bit just briefly about the other countries that are mirroring, because as you said, this is the most ambitious rollout of a certification of a framework globally. And I think we need to really focus that, guys, this isn't just about the 300,000 DFB companies for the US. There's a lot more impact here.
Yeah, there are. I think the impetus is twofold, Robert. Obviously, you've got countries out there that have companies within their industrial base that support US prime contractors in the DIB. And so they are very concerned that their companies don't get left in the cold. If they're not certified as a subcontractor to whether it's Boeing or like whoever, then they're going to, they'll be on a disadvantage from a business perspective. But also those countries also know that they've got their own cyber risk exposure from threat actors looking to compromise their in government contracting networks or industrial base themselves. And so I mentioned Canada because they formally announced it and funded their program. They're developing it right now, and I think it's going to look very similar, if not identical, to CMMC. I think they're using NIST 800-171. They may slap a maple leaf sticker on the cover, call it their own. But you also have other countries that we have certainly met with that have expressed similar intentions. I think the reciprocity issue is one that DoD will have to negotiate with each country bilaterally. But in terms of the overall sense and sentiment to implement a comprehensive cybersecurity conformity regime for supply chain risk is that's, as I said, within the executive branch as well. It's where the world's going.
Yep.
So and also we have seen an increase of organizations from overseas reaching out to us to see if we can come out and talk with them, get them on a schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So the interest in the overseas organizations is there, and they are ready to get started now. They don't want to wait. Yes. So it's a very interesting time, that's for sure.
Thank you. I wanted to emphasize, I want to bring up Larry Altenberg in the comments says, it's important to emphasize that DFARS already requires contractors to implement NIST 800-171 or 800-172 for contracts with access to CUI. So firms should be already implementing the security controls. CMMC is really an enforcement mechanism to ensure vendors are doing what they're already required to do. I thought that was a good emphasis. Thanks for bringing that up, Larry. I just wondered if any of you want to mention, just emphasize that at all or comment on that.
Well, David, that was one of the things I was bringing up a few moments ago. The important thing that organizations really need to understand, this isn't new. This has been in place, as Robert Hill mentioned, for 6 years. One of the questions that regardless of, who asks it, we get it asked all the time. When are these requirements going to be enforceable in our contracts? The requirements are already enforceable. The only thing everybody is waiting for is CMMC, which is that validation or that assessment arm, as Matt Travis mentioned. So when you're looking at organizations and when do they need to start preparing, you've probably heard it before, but the answer is now, because the requirements have already been there.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to point this one at Teague. Any of you can comment after Robert Teague, but anytime I hear an "at your discretion" or "at their discretion," "at its discretion" in anything, it makes me scratch my head. Okay, what does that mean? So do you have any insight on how the DoD intends to handle that broad, the DoD may also at its discretion comment?
Yeah, so this is an attempt of the DoD to let you know that they're still there. They're not going away. And at any point, you may think that you're at a level that requires a self-assessment, but at any time, the DoD or the contracting agency can say, you're not going to do a self-assessment. For this contract, you need this. So they give themselves that discretion to make those kind of decisions. Now, will that happen often? Most likely not, but it'll be one-offs that pretty much take place. But I think the DoD left that in there so they could still have some type of control.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, there's a lot we could go down there for sure. Robert Hill, I want to take the pressure off the other guys for a second and just ask you, engaging with third parties. So Robert T just mentioned that it's important to get ahead of this. I'm always of the opinion that minimum requirements are never a great idea for organizations. I want to be ahead of my competition, not just meet minimum requirements, but when do organizations and why would they engage third parties to help with preparing for CMMC or achieving CMMC compliance?
Wow, that's a whole bucket of worms right there, and it's a great question. And there's not a canned answer. There's not a black and white when an organization needs to engage. You have organizations that have experts inside their organization that have come out of the defense industrial base. They understand this. They know what's required. So they have that internal assistance, that internal specialization of resources. You've got plenty of other companies that don't. And you have today, we've got questions coming up. I'm monitoring the Q&A. And these are basic fundamental questions around CMMC. Those companies may very well be in a position to contract with that outside organization that has that expertise. And that's why Matt's organization with the Cyber AB, they came up with that RPO program. These are licensed, they have gone through the training. These are those RPs, RPAs that have the knowledge, that have gone through that training and can answer those questions for that organization. So it's really up to the organization as to when they feel like, are they grasping at answers or are they confident with what they are presenting? We talk about SSPs, what's included, what's required. We talk about POAMs, what can be a POAM, what can't. These are all things that those RPs, RPOs, those RPO organizations would be able to answer and guide them through this entire process. So it's really up to that organization. Do they feel comfortable? And do they feel like they can put their contracts at risk and do it internally? Or do they want that external expertise to help guide them through this process? T. Graham, you're on the back end of this. You see with C3POs, as you're working with organizations, you've done multiple big primes. They have the internal, so they're not working with those externals. But you also work with those that don't have that internal expertise and have hired those RPOs. So gentlemen, what is your take? What are you seeing for the ones that you've done?
Rob?
Okay, I'll go. I was waiting for you, Thomas, but okay. Yeah, no, you are spot on. So one thing we always recommend to our clients and those that we talk with is, and we've talked about this before, Robert. You've worked so hard as the organizations out there. You guys have worked so hard to get, DFARS 7012 compliant, right? So you've done all this heavy lift to get up on that platform. The last thing you want to do is ebb and dip like this. And, we talked about this earlier about, hey, we're done with the certification. We're good. See you guys in 3 years. That's not how it works, right? So first of all, we recommend that you send somebody to maybe a CCP course. I know that the CAECO and Cyber AB are working on some kind of course for executives and organizations to help them kind of understand CMMC. But in the meantime, you're going to need somebody to run that program over the 3 years until you come up for recertification. So we recommend go take this CCP course. That is one of the best places to learn and understand how the assessment processes work, right? And I'll let Thomas, after you're done.
I'm going to actually, before Thomas jumps in, I'm going to say something because you and I have done this on multiple interviews where we've talked to folks. And that's exactly, unfortunately, historically, legacy, the mindset in this industry is let's ramp up, let's get that, check that box. and then take a sigh of relief, take a deep breath. Now we're good until we get notification that they're coming back, and oh boy, here we go, we're ramping up again. This entire concept eliminates the legacy way of thinking. We are moving beyond checkbox compliance into security, where there is an expectation of maintaining that for 36 months. So this roller coaster ride of compliance is gone. That is legacy rearview mirror. And what we're talking about now is maintaining that indefinitely into the future, as long as you want to have those contracts. Graham?
Right. And if I can throw out some data points before Thomas jumps on there. You know, we have 6 clients that went through the joint surveillance assessments that scored a perfect 110 at the back end of that assessment. Out of those 6 companies, 4 of them sent folks to the CCP course.
Wow.
So there's your data point.
It's evidence. Thomas?
Sure. I mean, just to augment what Robert Hill and Robert Teague, and I'm just now realizing we have way too many Roberts on this call.
Agreed.
The biggest thing, if you've been around the DoD for a long time, the way I try to explain to folks, if they're familiar with the internal DoD ATO process, the ATO process really speaks to what is fielded into the government networks. It speaks to their accreditation, their assessment process. Even once you get that ATO, there's still things that you have to do during the time that ATO is valid. CMMC, well, CMMC just looks backwards to your organization versus what you're fielding. Now, along with, you know, those requirements for ATOs, for organizations that pass the CMMC assessment, you've got to maintain, as Robert Hill and Robert Teague mentioned, you still have to do annual attestations to SPURS. And if you're not familiar with that, that's through the PIEE website that you go through when you do that. You're actually, I believe, supposed to be doing it now. This in your DFAR 7012 requirements. There is a delineation between those two. That they're not the same thing. But what I like to tell folks is right now they're working in conjunction. DFAR 7012 speaks to not only NIST 800-171, there's the C through G requirements, you know, with some of the incident reporting and some of the other things. More than likely, and Matt Travis can probably speak better to this than I can, DFAR 7012 is actually slated for an update as well, because keep in mind the proposed rule we're talking about is the 32 CFR rule. It's not the 48 CFR rule, which actually identifies how this is going to be included in the contracts. And I'll shut up. And Matt, was I coherent in that thought, or was I completely off base?
No, Thomas, you are correct. So for the audience, not to get too deep in the arcane rule of federal or arcane world of federal rulemaking, there are 2 CMMC rules. One has just shown itself, which is the Title 32 rule. That's really the program codification of the actual program itself as part of the national defense section of the Code of Federal Regulations. The section, Title 48 section of the Code of Federal Regulations deals with procurement and acquisition. So there's a corresponding Title 48 rule that's going to get more into details about the procurement rules on how contracting officers will use the CMMC program in making award decisions or making a requirement for awarding contracts. So we don't expect it to be nearly as long or as detailed. So that should drop in this March. So by March we will see what that looks like, and if the DFAR 7012 clause is updated as well, we'll see what that looks like. So as we go further into 2024, I think everyone will have a good idea of what the program calls for. That's the Title 32 rule that came out in December, and what the procurement particulars are for how CMMC will be a requirement for contracts. That will show itself in March. And again, I think we're on a good path to having CMMC up and running here probably a year from now. Could be sooner, could be later, but that's what we're hoping for.
Thank you, Matt. There's a Serge Kikanda in the comments asked a question that I'd like to just bring up to you, probably Robert Hill first. Even though the cost estimates have been released in the proposed rule, How can we effectively present that information to a company/leadership, regardless of size, so they understand the urgency and start working on it now? So Robert Hill, if you want to start with that, and then I'll go around it. I want to give each of you an opportunity to just comment on that if you'd like to.
This is risk analysis is what you're talking about, Dave. And you're talking about the return on that investment. An organization that has, look at the overall business. If they're receiving, 60, 70% of their organization's income from DoD contracts, or in some cases, 100% of their revenue from DoD contracts, they need to be taking this very seriously, because this, to their CFO, to their C-level, impacts their ability to be sustainable in this industry. If they are taking a 10% of their overall revenue, we've seen companies that do a pre-self-assessment just to determine if CMMC is something they want to pursue. And there have been many cases that they have opted out of DoD contracts because it's such a small percentage of what they do. And it's going to cost them more to achieve this than the revenues generated by those contracts. So this is a financial/risk decision that organization has to make at a C-level, at an executive leadership level, to determine if they want to continue doing business in the defense industrial base with the DoD under these guidelines, or they simply move their business away from that line of business, because this is a cost of doing business with the DIB. You can argue, you can go back and forth, you can say, we're not doing it, we're putting it off. It's too expensive, it's too arduous, all the excuses that we've heard for the last year and a half. Guys, it's a cost of doing business.
Well, to kind of tag onto that, Robert, and going back to what we said earlier, it's not only a cost of doing business, it's a cost of doing business that if you've been doing this type of business for a number of years, you've already been required to do.
And attested to it.
Exactly. And one of the implications, if I was the CFO or CEO, well, one of the things that I would tell them is go look at the Department of Justice's website. They are actively pursuing organizations that falsely attest to their compliance with the CUI requirements. Again, this has been around for a number of years now. When organizations are talking about implementing the CMMC items, you're talking about implementing the actual assessment portion. You're not talking about implementing access control, awareness and training, incident response. Some of these other items, they have been around for a number of years, and the implications to the business, well, not only Department of Justice, but once the rules become final, any and all contracts, depending upon the level that the contracts require, you have to conform to CMMC, or else you can't be awarded those contracts. And Robert Teague, again, too many Roberts. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, let's just be honest here. NIST 800-171, and everybody on this panel knows that these are basic cybersecurity practices. Let's be honest here. This is not NIST 853, which is kind of what FedRAMP is based off of, right? These are a subset of practices, or requirements as they're called now, that are pulled from NIST 853 that make up NIST 800-171, and they're all basic stuff. Most of the organizations out there are doing these things already. So where is the money being spent? For some folks, it's they don't want to keep that data on-prem. They want to go to a cloud environment. So they're trying to isolate, maybe shrink the scope down a little bit. Some of them, whatever their decisions are and how they get to this, these are just basic requirements. Let's not forget also that maturity was stripped out of CMMC 1.0. Does that mean you should not be trying to mature your processes over the next 3 years until you recertify? Of course you should be. That's what we do as cybersecurity experts, right? So yeah, it's a business decision, as Robert Hill mentioned. And yes, I've actually had conversations with organizations that told me, Rob, we don't make enough from the DoD to pursue this,
Yep.
and
I've seen that.
Yeah. And I tell them, that's your decision. It's your business model. I'm not going to come in and tell you how to run your business. That's your business decision. But I will tell you that all of the folks that benefit from the work that our DIB contractors do certainly appreciate all of that work that they do. And it's vital that you are compliant with this, because we can't fight our nation's wars and win without you.
That's right. It's vital. It's critical to protect this.
There's an anonymous comment here. Don't companies want to protect their intellectual property? Like it was stated, this is basic cyber hygiene. The rub is to prove that it's done. I think part of the context here is a lot of what we're talking about here is as they said, basic hygiene, and it is important to engage that way. I do want to get into the audience questions and answer those. I wanted to ask really quickly the federal tax information. There's FTI, or federal tax information, being categorized as CUI. As we talk about expanding the scope of CMMC, as we talk about why companies should invest in this, and really think about how that impacts moving forward, I think maybe Thomas, if you want to talk quickly about how is that going to impact? First of all, what is federal tax information, and how's that categorization of CUI? How's that going to expand things?
Oh, you mean we're supposed to define all the acronyms that we're throwing around in the conversation?
Acronym soup, yes.
So the easiest way to describe federal taxpayer information is that it's most closely aligned to those organizations within higher education. If you're submitting information into a FAFSA, for instance, that could be, or actually is, classified as federal taxpayer information. So what we've seen over the past year is, and to Matt Travis's point earlier, other agencies, while not looking specifically by name at CMMC, they're looking at the protection of the information that organizations store, process, or transmit. So, for instance, the Department of Education earlier this year started saying, hey guys, if you have FTI, this is CUI, here are items that you need to have in place, and they're implementing it under GLBA, Graham-Leach-Billy Act. Well, the part that a lot of folks glossed over was at the bottom of the announcement. There's about 2 or 3 sentences down there that said, information on 800-171 implementation will be forthcoming in a later announcement. So what does that mean? Well, that is the self-attestation requirements that the DoD implemented with DFARS. So Matt mentioned read between the tea leaves. This is the steps to now it branching out into another federal organization. You're starting to see other agencies within the federal government start that convergence that Robert Hill was talking about and Matt Travis was talking about earlier to a standardized rule set. DHS, is implementing self-attestation requirements. Mentioned DOE. Of course, DoD has had self-attestation for a number of years, and now they're looking at the third-party attestation to verify compliance with it. So it's only going to, my opinion, because I am not a DoD employee, my opinion is that as we go forward, and once this rule becomes finalized and the program's implemented by the DoD, you're probably going to see other agencies start doing this from a self-attestation standpoint. And if you're not familiar with what constitutes CUI, please go out and look at NARA's website, the National Archives website, because every current categorization of CUI is there, but those categorizations get updated pretty regularly. So please, if you think this may pertain to you, go take a look at it.
Great advice on that. So we're reaching the end of our time together. We've got a bunch of audience questions. I want to get to a couple of these, and I also want to make sure that we have time for the panelists to kind of do a wrap at the end. There's a couple of things that, from a housekeeping perspective, we're going to continue to do these panel discussions with these and similar panelists probably once every 4 to 6 weeks. So please do keep in touch with us. Watch this space. We want your interaction. There's a ton of questions we didn't get to today, and so there's a lot of content. You'll see You'll see us publish some blog posts and some other forms of communication, but please do keep coming back to these. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Any thoughts on how this will affect universities that have to be CMMC compliant? How will they afford it?
Hey, Dave,
go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead,
I was
Matt.
going to say, we've been looking at this. We've got the AB's got the KCO have an academic advisory council. It's really got a dual mission. One, how can we integrate CMMC curriculum into continuing education programs in universities and colleges, and get more assessors trained. But then also it's helping them understand the requirements for universities and other higher education institutions who will likely have CMMC requirements. A lot of universities to contract directly with DoD, and not just through grants, through actual contracts. So it's expected that they have CUI, but the challenge is universities are much different than defense contractors. For one, the whole culture is one of information sharing. You've got absent-minded professors handling CUI, and you also have what I would call non-traditional environments in which CUI is stored, transmitted, or processed. Places like wind tunnels, and certain universities that support the Navy have CUI out in buoys and in ships and boats. And so it's a bit different to think how you actually implement all the practices of 800-171 in those environments. It's going to be probably a bit trickier. There was nothing in the proposed rule that gives universities any special dispensation or consideration. We'll have to see if there's external initiatives from DoD to help universities understand how to best implement the standard. So it's something we'll watch, but they're going to be held to the same standard that industry is if they support DoD on a contract.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Any other comments on that? Okay, good. For the panelists, we're at 12:53 right now. What I'd love to have you do is, and again, there's tons more questions. We will try to get back to each of you on that. Matt, can you start us off with anything you want people to really think about? Any primary objectives you want them to keep in mind, and what should people be most concerned about right now?
I wouldn't be concerned about anything. I would make sure you actually read the rule. Now, I grant you in a PDF form, the rule is 234 pages, and that's before you even get to the attachments like the scoping guides and the assessment guide. So it's not a quick read. But if you're invested in CMMC, either from a perspective of a DIB company, your employer or company you own, or you want to engage in CMMC, become an assessor, it's going to be a great professional opportunity. We need more assessors and CCPs coming into the fold, or our practitioners. Whatever, if you're all interested in CMMC, read the rule first so you can have a full understanding of how this is all going to work. And then, as we said earlier, you be constructive in your commentary. Second thing I would say is, if any of you have kind of been either disinterested, demoralized, cynical, or skeptical of CMMC because of some of the fits and starts and twists and turns that this program has had since it was first conceived, I would look at this proposed rule as pretty concrete evidence of the department's commitment to doing this. It takes a lot of effort to write a rule, 234 pages, a lot of manpower and time and effort and coordination to get it through rulemaking to this point. So don't deceive yourself thinking this is never going to happen. I can kind of skate by, not enter in self-assessment scores or kind of gloss over the actual practices. Those days are coming to a quick end. CMMC will be up and running before you know it. And if you haven't started, you're already behind. So this publication's proposed rule, I think, is firsthand evidence that the commitment the department has to make this happen.
Thank you, Matt. Thomas Graham, same question. What would your final thoughts be on this conversation today?
I mean, my final thoughts is just emphasizing what I've already said, is understand these requirements aren't new. The requirements aren't forthcoming. The requirements have been around for a number of years. I have friends and family that work for contracting organizations, and I would absolutely hate for them to lose their jobs because they lost a contract just because they didn't understand, what they were supposed to be doing. If you have questions, please reach out to RPOs, reach out to C3PAO, ask the questions. We're not lawyers, so it's not going to cost you anything to ask us questions. Okay. If we're at a conference, it may cost you a couple of drinks, but I mean, that's aside the point. Do not wait. at the end of the day, do not wait. Ask your questions now. Get a plan in place, because most of these organizations, from what we've seen, it's taken them anywhere from 8 months to a year to get from point A to point B. So if you're waiting and you're starting now, well, guess what? That's now taking you into the 2025 calendar year timeline.
Thank you, Thomas. Great points there. Teague, same question there.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Dave. First I want to say, great work by Stacy Bosjanek, the CIO office, everybody that worked their butts off inside the DoD to get this rule put together. Just a phenomenal job. I mean, everything they told us about this rule from the onset is in the rule. It hasn't deviated much from what the DoD has been telling us. And so I really appreciate that from the DoD and the openness of Stacy Bosjanek, Buddy Dees, and everybody else involved. So great work to all of them. For the organizations, and I don't know if it was Matt Travis that said this, or if it was Robert Hill, or if it was Bob Metzger, but we were at one of the conferences and they said, listen, if you're waiting for CMMC, that train is coming and you're standing on the platform. If you're waiting, that train is going to pass you by. And then you're either going to have to jump to get on board to that train, or you just watch it go by. Yep. Don't be the one that watches it go by. You need to be on your way now, working to get compliant to this. If the DoD and what you do is your primary business, I don't know how to say it any other way. Don't wait. We've been saying this for the last 3 years. Don't wait. Start now. Get going on it. The sooner, the better.
Thank you, Teague. Robert Hill, kind of saved the best for last there. What are your final thoughts? And as importantly, how can you all help the DIB folks that are on the line here?
I want to take this a little different direction. We've heard about, being the CMMC because it's required by government, and somebody anonymously put the question out there about, this is compliance is a government construct. And I would disagree with that. This is not a government construct. Compliance is the validation that you are doing what you need to be doing. We see commercial entities like BMW, VW going to their suppliers with something called TISAX out of German auto manufacturing. Has nothing to do with government, has nothing to do at all, other than BMW saying you will have TISAX so you can validate you're protecting our data and our information and our supply chain. So this isn't just about government. And so what we're seeing here is I caution companies to look at this as just another compliance regime. They're taking this small amount of CUI and they're boxing it into an enclave, and they're just doing what's necessary to get the checkbox of CMMC. Guys, we need a mental paradigm shift. We have to move away from the concept of compliance to meet just these requirements to a securing of our enterprise. And in many organizations, this is the first step. Realistically, you should have already been doing everything in these. These are not something that's specific just to protecting CUI. This is basic foundational cybersecurity hygiene that we're making a lot ado about because now it's being forced. So those are my final thoughts. Let us know how we can assist you. We're here with the platform, with the CRT, from the OSCs to the RPOs to TIG to the organizations that are using it as C3PAOs. But more importantly, use this ecosystem. Use the RPOs that we talked about. Use the C3PAOs. Ask the questions. We are here to support you in this journey and to make sure that you're successful. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for this. Carosoft, thank you so much for putting this on. Back over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks for that. Brandon just brought up this context slide. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Robert Hill's also given his personal email address to a few, in a few answers. Please reach out to any of us directly, or reach out to these aliases. We are looking forward to working with you moving forward. A lot of great questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. So we will be doing, again, follow-on panel discussions, as well as communicating with you via blog posts and follow-up emails to this webinar. Matt, Robert T, Thomas Graham, Robert Hill, thank you so much for being panelists today. Really learned a lot, and appreciate your time. For Carosoft, thank you for hosting. And to all of you attendees, Thank you for spending this time with us. We appreciate that, and hope that you received great value. Good luck, and please reach out, use the ecosystem, and we're happy to help any way we can. Thanks, everyone. Brandon,
Thanks,
back to you.
guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Thanks, David.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, as Dave just said, thank you all again for joining us today. Really appreciate your participation. Hope you all found this helpful. And as we mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending out a follow-up email within 48 hours with a link to the recording and some additional answers to maybe questions that maybe didn't get answered today. I know we ran out of time to get through everything, but there was a lot left on the books, so we'll be sure to follow up. Please don't hesitate to reach out. As mentioned, all of our contact info is here and will be sent in that follow-up email. And we would love your feedback on today's presentation as well. There should be some polling questions displayed on your screen. So please help us, let us know where we met the mark, how we can make the next one better, and how we can better continue to support you all. So thank you all again for attending. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.